associated with Jesus, the sayings of Jesus, and he put them together in his book, and he called it The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And it basically is just, Jesus was a really good guy, he really had good advice for living, and more of us should follow his advice instead of all these other things that we do. But he dropped all the miracles, the God stuff. So is Thomas Jefferson a Christian? Well, he's one of the ones that founded, the country. So if you think about, well, are we a Christian nation? That's kind of an interesting dilemma. And the most wicked, if I can use that phrase, perspective on all of that is the one by Harold Bloom that argues that American religions, homegrown American religions, are pagan. Not even Christian at all, says Harold Bloom, who was Jewish. Harold Bloom, he was, I don't know if I showed you who. He just died, I think, a year or two ago. Well, 2019, that's already a while. But he was primarily a Shakespeare scholar. But he wrote about lots and lots of stuff. But so his book, The American Religion, is the one that I mentioned. I think the main point of that is that if you really believe in Christianity, you really believe Jesus, and you believe in the traditional Christian view of Jesus and what Jesus was teaching, which was asceticism. Not the idea that by believing in Jesus we'll have more money, more wealth, more good things, etc., etc. That's not part of the traditional Christianity. That's tribalism. Be one of us and you'll have more of everything. That's a tribe as opposed to Christianity. Christianity is universal, everybody. Jesus was here for everyone, and teaching a message, etc. So by that standard, most of the more homegrown American religions are what he calls pagan, because a pagan religion is, how do I interact with God and nature mostly, so that I get more of everything. Like, how am I going to be more successful? Well, in a sense, that's the way a lot of so-called Christian religions. But the trouble, of course, is if they call themselves Christians, or we call ourselves Christians, who's to say you're not, right? That's kind of wrong. That got me in trouble, though, in the 90s, because I wrote a letter. Someone complained that members of the Church of Latter-day Saints are not Christians. Of course, the beliefs that they have are different than the beliefs that he had, and he thought he was a Christian, and they weren't. But I pointed out, hey, they call themselves Christians. How can you say they're not Christians? And boy, I got hate mail. So never do that again. I learned my lesson.
If you don't get hate mail, you're not doing it right.
Well, yeah, but there are people that have their living rooms blown up and have people break in and hit you with a hammer, and there's repercussions to some of that stuff. So, I'm not interested in encouraging any of that kind of stuff. So I think I'm brave enough at least to say what I really believe to my classes. I'm sorry about this, but I'm being honest. It's just who I am. So I apologize in advance for saying what I really think. However, and by the way, when I criticize our current executive, to admit, I have like a little bit of doubt. Maybe the kinds of things he's talking about are actually right. That's, you look at how much, depends on who you're reading and everything. But, so that's all. Okay. And something I had in my notes that I don't think I ever discussed, but I probably should have. That's why they're in my notes. Where were they though? What was the question? Oh, well. I had some notes on early Christian American religions, and might be in the previous one. However, so we have done Bishop Barclay, and we've already started David Hume. I've got links to Jonathan Edwards here, but so the issue now is David Hume. David Hume, notice, is born in 1711, dies in 1776. So that's one of those dates that's really easy to remember, right? 1776. So it's a nice firm, date for me to remember. Okay, 1776, and then Kant, and then my favorite is Hegel. And by the way, I think of these three classes today and Wednesday and then next Monday as kind of the peak, the narrative climax of the course, if you think of it that way. It's not, of course, like, that's the end of philosophy, but instead, of course, I think of the rest of philosophy as kind of a reaction to this period. We still essentially accept the conclusions that these three philosophers are going to lead us to as the answer to at least the metaphysical questions. We'll still try to figure out epistemological questions. What can we really know? How does the mind work? Consciousness, those kinds. We're always going to be asking what's beautiful and what enables us to think of things as being beautiful. Logic is, of course, even more advanced today than ever, although we have some interesting questions when we link logic to languages. Ethics. Ethics is again an issue for us that I don't know that we'll ever be finished with. However, why is metaphysics over? Well, for one thing, thanks to David Hume, who gives us kind of the exact end of British empiricism by saying, well, if you're really a British empiricist, well, he doesn't say that. But even, if what we really know for sure is what I'm experiencing right this moment. What I'm experiencing right this moment. Of course, as soon as, we know ever since Augustine, time keeps on changing, so, well, the problem with that is I only know what I know right this minute. And as soon as I count on my memory in order for me to establish things like cause and effect, or near and far, or where I am, or even that there's a physical world that's causing my experiences, all of that depends on my memory, and my memory officially can be faulty, right? And therefore, we don't have the absolute proof of any of those things, that this is the cause of this effect. By the way, there's a logical fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is a fallacy that says because of this, therefore, I'm sorry, after this, therefore, because of this. There's the word hoc again for this, right? Ergo propter, all because of. So it's considered a fallacy. Just because something occurs before something else, it's a fallacy for you to automatically think that this first event caused the second event. It might be related, but we don't, you can't officially, and this is really David Hume doing this to us, you can't officially say it's proof. He just put that partition there in our minds that, well, what we meant by proof before is kind of sort of mathematical proof. You don't really argue over 2 plus 2 equals 4, although everybody gets into George Orwell uses that as the I shouldn't say George Orwell because it makes you sneeze. Oh, it didn't. Oh well. Sorry. But George Orwell in 1984, that's the thing that if you're convinced by the government that 2 plus 2 equals 5, you've clearly been taken over by the thought processes that the government's imposing on you, right? So, but 2 plus 2 equals 4. I think 7 plus 5 equals 12 is actually a significant addition as well, as we'll see. But so, thank you, David Hume. We don't have cause and effect is not proof. Yes, of course, that's really the basis for so much of science. And David Hume isn't saying that we can't use science. He's a very practical person. But at the same time, he's being critical of people like Descartes and others, like philosophers that think they are actually proving something beyond any shadow of a doubt. And in fact, when we follow the idea that perceptions are all that we're thinking about, even if they're mental. So you're perceiving the physical things that you see, hear, taste, touch, etc. But also, if you close your eyes and you're thinking about your mother talking with you, that's a perception. So they're talking about those as perceptions as well, even though you might think of them as just mental perceptions. And that's what breaks them into lively. The current ones that you're experiencing are lively. These are lively. No, he's inventing, but so these are lively. And the less lively ones are the ones that I'm not experiencing sensually, but thinking. Oh, I can imagine Einstein always with the tongue sticking out, making fun of the cameraman. I have ideas, and they're in my mind, and and I know I'm having them at the moment, but they're less lively, says David. But all ideas are from impressions. So if I'm having an impression of Albert Einstein sticking his tongue out at the cameraman, that's because I've seen the pictures so many places. I've got a big one up on the wall upstairs, and so on. So would I have had that idea of Einstein had it not been for the impression that I received at least more than once, really? What about these AI things? I've been laughing like crazy over this parrot that keeps making fun of the police officers. I don't know if you by the way, the quiz question I have for you today is: do you think modern media is distracting you, making it difficult for you to concentrate and accomplish things?
Skew your reality, help you form your own, forming your own opinions. I go on.
I was almost late today because I was watching such hilarious little. And everyone says, well, they're AI generated. You really don't have a parrot having those kinds of conversations with police officers. So this parrot's, answering the police, and it's just hilarious. I did actually have a parrot once, I bought it because I was very curious about exactly whether or not parrots are using language or just mimicking language, right? That was years ago. I was getting ready to go and buy an African gray from a pet store, and those are like 1,000 plus. And my wife saw an ad in the newspaper for a parrot, a talking parrot. It was only $250 because